Welcome to a Mixing with Mike tip brought to you by MPGinsider.com and the MPG Online Music Production School. This is a mixing tip on mixing snare bottom mics. So when you have a snare top and a snare bottom mic, essentially the snare top mic is primarily going to capture the body or the tone of the actual snare drum, even though it's closest to the actual stick hit. So the transient peak will pop out most there. But most of the brightness and presence of the sound comes from the snares that are actually on the bottom of the head. So these are the curly wires that get strapped across and tightened up, attached, and they sort of touch or are nestled up against the bottom head, so that when it resonates, it gives it this kind of buzziness, and that's the hence the name snare sound. Now, when we have a mic, the first thing we probably want to do is make sure that it's properly phase aligned. And that's a whole other video itself, but essentially the peaks here should match the peaks on the snare bottom mic as well. So assuming that we have that in place, then what we want to do, or the tip here, the idea here is that what we want to do is we want to try to get the presence out of this bottom snare mic without adding a lot of extra bleed. So when we listen to the actual snare drum itself, we can hear by taking out the snare bottom mic how much presence is kind of added in. So what I want to do here is I want to start by setting up a little processor here. So if I get a C1 compressor gate, so what I want to do here is I'm going to gate and compress this, okay? And so let's just start by working here with the, actually I'll start by working with the gate. Right, so we're going to start by working with the gate here and the basic, let's see, we got our fast attack. We kind of want a sort of a medium-ish release. And let's see here, let's set a threshold. Now there is some extra buzziness in here, okay? But primarily I'm less concerned about that. What I want to do is I really want to focus this on just the snap. So what I'm going to do here is try to separate these two guys. I got a snare open and a snare close. I want to make sure that this is trapped in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to compress this guy. And what I want to do is I want to have a fairly fast attack here. Kind of a long release. And then I'm going to bring up my... And now I want to compress this pretty heavily. And I'll explain why in a second. So we got this guy in here, and let's see, we got a little makeup gain. So you hear there's a lot of extra noisy stuff in there that's going to be problematic. And by compressing and gating, what I'm doing is I'm getting out a lot more of the brightness that I'm looking for. And of course I want to go through the whole song and make sure that I can actually slow down this as well if I want a little more pop. Alright, so if I feel like this is too much, then let's just see. It depends on how much we get out of the snare top mic. So here we have the snare top. And now if I slow down the attack here, that'll give me a little bit more pop in the snare drum as opposed to just going to give me a little bit more of a choked kind of sound, but allow me to pull the mic up a little bit higher so I can kind of play with this. I'm going to go back to this with the slower attack. And so the compression really kicking in there really focuses or condenses those snares. And one other thing that I would probably do after this is to go ahead and just put a little filter here on the bottom end. So you can hear what I'm doing here is just by filtering off some of that low end, I'm just allowing this to kind of occupy a lot of the snap of the drum and letting the body of the drum come from the lower mic. And it depends. See, you may want to have some of that body added in there. To me, it kind of takes a little tonal shift, adds a little tonal twist to it, which means it's probably not perfectly phase aligned. Without. Right, and there's your snap. Now this is completely unprocessed on the snare top mic because we could add in a little bit of compression here, and this would also help to give this a little bit of snap and then mix the two of those in. So let's just kind of do that real quick, and maybe just from a dynamics point of view, something that, well, like a classic way to go with this would be to go with like an API compressor, which I just passed right over for whatever reason. And so here we can do a sort of classic thing where, you know, have just sort of a light ratio, maybe 2 to 1, slow attack to really allow the transient to pop through, and sort of a fast release. All right, and then we can have play with the right, have that kind of snap in there a little bit better. Without. All right, give it a little bit more body there. And the release we can kind of play with depending upon how long we want to hold the tone out. So I can make it a little bit longer by slowing down the release time. Or I can make that sustain shorter. So you can actually hear the sustain of the snare drum is a little bit shorter here. The tone is a little bit longer there. So it's a matter of what's the best musical value. And there you have it. So from here, of course, we can EQ, we can get a little more body into the snare drum, but this is just a quick tip on how to process the snare bottom mic just to give you the sense of presence without adding a whole lot of extra noise into the actual snare drum sound. So there you have it. There's our mixing with mic tip on mixing in snare bottom mics. You can join the live classes every Wednesday at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And this is Mixing with Mike.